Hey guys, this is PJ with Bite Size Strategy Guides here with my top 5 tips for Cascadia. So Cascadia is easily one of my favorite games of all time, and despite it being a relatively simple game to learn, it can be a kind of difficult game to master. This video is intended for people already familiar with the rules of Cascadia, so if you're looking for a how to play video, you can search on YouTube, there's like a million of those, but there's not so many how to win videos, which is why I'm making this. I was looking for those kinds of videos when I was studying for the World Series of Board Gaming for the Cascadia tournament there, and since I won that tournament, I think that kind of qualifies me to make this video. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed these 5 tips to improve your Cascadia gameplay. Pretty much everyone I've talked to about Cascadia has initially complained that foxes suck. I myself thought that, but have now since come around. Foxes are not just not bad, they're actually the best animal in the game for 3 main reasons. The first reason is their efficiency. One fox is going to score you more points than almost any other animal if placed properly. In Cascadia, the baseline point value you should think of for these animal tokens is about 3 points. Anything that would earn you less is usually not worth playing, unless you have no other choice. Foxes, by contrast, can be easily worth up to 3, 5, or even 7 points. Obviously, you're not going to get these 7 points every time, as surrounding a fox with 3 pairs pretty much requires you to plan around it. But even a fox next to a single pair is still worth 3 points in this example. And that's not at all hard to do. Remember how I mentioned 3 points or more per animal is what you're aiming for? Well, for Deer C, you'd have to play at least 6 deers to get to that point. You only play 20 animal tokens over the course of a game, so you're committing almost a third of them to just deer. And deer kind of suck. That is, unless you're doing a ring around Fox C, and you get up to 6 points for just one little orange dude. The same goes for bears or fish. The animal really doesn't matter too much because foxes are just that flexible. They will fit into basically any strategy you choose, and they're the one animal you should play in just about every single game. It depends on the fox card, of course. Some are better than others, but I personally will find myself usually ending up with at least 3 to 6 foxes in a typical game. So yeah, play foxes pretty much every game, but what else should you play? Well, tip 2 is all about picking the right animal strategy. There are a few factors you should consider at the start of the game, but the most important one is your starting keystone. Each player is going to have a different one, and whatever your starting keystone is, you'll need to commit to the animal on it at least somewhat. This is because getting that starting nature token is super valuable for avoiding the worst case scenarios. Like when you're all in on the deer strat, but the jerk to your right keeps taking deer tokens from you. This kind of leads us into our second bit of advice. Try to avoid going for the strategy the person before you is, because they're going to take all the same animals that you want. Ideally here you would want to pivot and instead snag whatever animals the person after you wants. That way you get to be the jerk. The final thing you should consider when picking your strategy are the animal scoring cards, and which ones synergize well with each other and which ones are just straight up good. I'm going to make a separate video talking about the strengths of these scoring cards, but just know for now that line of sight hawks are absolutely busted. If they're in the game, you should play them. Tip number 3, don't neglect terrain. When I first started playing, terrain was far from the priority. It was all about getting the animal tokens in the right spots, and when you're starting out and getting better, I do recommend focusing on animals. But as you do get better, you'll need to pay more and more attention to the terrain tiles. At the end of the game, you score 1 point for each tile in your largest habitat of each type. When placing a tile down, you want to make sure that you don't just place it for the animal spot. Ideally, it should also grow at least one of your largest terrains. Otherwise, it's like throwing a point away. And getting a tile that matches 2 of your terrains not only feels amazing, but it looks pretty as well. But speaking of pretty, let's take a look at this situation here. How would you end up placing this tile? Take a moment to pause the video and figure out what is the optimal orientation here. Well, if you place the tile like this, unfortunately, while your board looks really pretty, this is not the way that you want to do it. It's actually better to rotate the tile like this, because doing it this way allows you in the future to play a tile that could potentially expand not just your wetlands, but your forest as well. While the other scenario looks better, it's not going to help you more in the long term. So unfortunately, Cascadia's biggest flaw is that a pretty board is usually not the best board. You kind of want these weird zigzagging patterns ideally. in order to give yourself the most flexibility when putting down tiles. The final thing that I want to mention about terrain is that you get bonus points for having the largest terrain of a certain type. Early on, you should just focus on building up all the terrains as much as you can, while not sacrificing the placement of any animal tiles or tokens. But once you start to get around the halfway point of the game, you want to start thinking about which terrains you could feasibly get the majority in. I like to typically aim for 2 or maybe 3 terrains, depending on the game. If you're able to win at least one terrain majority, it's going to put you in a good spot and give you that edge in the closer games of Cascadia. Tip number 4 is be flexible. You should always go into a game of Cascadia with some kind of plan in mind, like we mentioned earlier, but you should also be ready to throw it out at a moment's notice. Unless you're the reincarnation of Mr. Rogers, you're not going to have the sheer karmic luck needed for the right tile and right token to come out every time. So to help yourself out, you want to give yourself some options. Typically, there's going to be at least 3 tiles on your board for you to place an animal token, and ideally they'll support 3 different animals. That way, 3 out of the 5 animal tokens are good draws, and you have to be pretty unlucky to not end up with something to play. Avoid becoming dependent on a single animal type showing up, especially if it's the one that jerk before you keeps snagging. Sometimes though, you'll be forced into a spot like this, which is why you should always have a nature token on hand. And speaking of, tip 5, spend your nature tokens, or I will find you. Seriously, a nature token in hand is worth 1 point. A nature token spent could be worth up to 9 points with one of these bad boys. Early on, keeping at least 1 or 2 to get you out of sticky situations is a good idea. But later in the game, there's a good chance they're going to earn you more than 1 point. So in those last few turns, consider what spending a nature token might get you. If there's still a few critical animal tokens you need by the end of the game, consider spending those bad boys and go for the reroll. Now, one thing you might be thinking is, but PJ, nature tokens break ties, so maybe I shouldn't be spending them. And to that I say, you know what else breaks ties? Having more points than your opponents. Spend them. And there you have it, 5 quick and easy tips for Cascadia that'll help you improve your game. Now, before we go, I actually do have one secret little bonus tip that I want to share with you guys, and it has to do with the kinds of habitats animals can show up in. So this is something that I didn't learn until quite a few games into Cascadia, but each animal in the game has 3 preferred habitats. And the quickest way to tell what these are is by looking at the keystone tiles. For example, bears can be found on ocean, mountains, or forests, which kind of makes sense if you are familiar with bears, right? What this means is that any terrain tile that doesn't have one of those 3 habitats will never have a bear on it. So knowing which habitats can have certain kinds of animals in them will help you out immensely when you are planning your board in terms of optimizing the odds that you actually get the animals where they need to be. Thank you for sticking with me until the end, and hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you do have any questions, feel free to pop them down in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as I can. If you'd like to see more videos like this, give me a thumbs up and a subscribe. It helps me out immensely. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time.